What's your major?
I'm a political science major.
Okay, you just like to know how communication
Yeah.
works? Okay, I like it. So I'm a journalism professor here. I teach journalism and media studies courses. And I had kind of a shocking situation last year. I had a journalism student who was double majoring journalism and strategic communication graduate. And we asked her a question about how journalism and PR work together. Like nothing. There was nothing there. And it was kind of surprising to me because journalism and PR work together so much that it was a little bit shocking to me. And so Dr. Krajewski and I were talking with some of the other professors in the department about how much we really need to talk about that so that it doesn't seem like two separate majors or two separate industries, that you really see the way that they work together. So I want to start by making you think for a little bit. I want you to make a list of similarities and differences between journalism and public relations. So take just a few minutes. If you don't have paper and pencil, borrow something from somebody, but make a list of similarities and differences. Maybe take one more minute. So the picture's a little deceptive. I want you to believe only PR professionals drink coffee, and that's not true. Journalists also drink coffee. I know, so scratch that one off your differences list. But what do you have for some similarities between journalism and public relations? Michaela?
They're both like upheld to like the standard of ethics.
Yeah, there's a standard of ethics for both groups. Great. Sam?
Sorry.
Did you have a hand up? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Lorraine.
I said that they both work towards delivering messages to the
Yeah, perfect. Delivering messages to some audience. Juan?
I said that they both should be transparent.
Ooh, what do you mean by that? They both should be transparent.
Journalism, they shouldn't like skew their story.
Okay.
To try and make one side look bad or the other, and then PR practitioners shouldn't like hide things to
Okay.
try and like cover up things.
Yeah, so no shady business on either side. You want to be transparent about where your information comes from or how you're portraying a story. All right?
In addition to transparency, they also try to be credible in their
Yeah.
sources and
They want to
findings.
build trust, right? And they want to be relied on by the people who are reading information from them or getting information from them. Good.
I feel like there's sometimes shady bit.
Sometimes there's shady business, but that's not a goal, right? Well,
Yeah.
let's talk about the best way to be a PR practitioner or to be a journalist. I appreciate that.
Just trying
Yeah.
to get it out there.
It's
Natalie.
important to build good relationships within them. Like,
Good relationships with,
to build good relationships with the people you're working with or your publics.
yeah, perfect.
Someone you're doing a story on.
Important to build good relationships with your sources, with your clients, with your publics. Adam?
They both give us a view, and they change the way that we can look at like a certain issue.
Okay, they both give us a view and they might change the way that we understand an issue. Peter?
Journalism is writing what the people want to see or hear, and public relations is making the companies relate to the people, knowing in advance what they want to see.
Oh,
or
these
hear.
are good, like textbook-y definitions. So it's interesting how you describe journalism, though, because this is how George Orwell describes it, printing what someone else does not want printed. So journalists sometimes write stories that people don't necessarily want to see, right? For instance, we just read a story, the story just came out about scandal in the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania. Horrible. I didn't want to see that, right? But I'm glad that that was uncovered and maybe now people are going to address it. But yeah, the goal is, read me your goal for PR again.
Knowing in advance what people want to see.
Okay, knowing in advance what people, because they put some research into that.
Yeah,
Okay.
advertisements and marketing.
Anything else you can think of for similarities? Anything else on your list for similarities between the two?
They both work with the media industry.
Both work with the media industry, sure. Both are communication, both are involve writing. What about some differences between the two? What'd you get for differences?
I say like in a particular issue, like journalists want the nitty gritty, like straight answer from people of like a company if there's like a bad thing and like a company's about to go bankrupt or an oil spill or something like that.
Mhm.
And I said that PR people try to steer away from negative communication so they don't want their company to go down in flames, and there's that barrier.
Absolutely. So journalists, a goal is to be objective in what they're writing, which means if it's bad, we're going to tell you that stuff was bad. But PR is more subjective, right? Because the goal is to represent your client in a certain way. So if it was bad, we're going to figure out a way to spin that, to change the narrative around it. Good. What's another one?
I said that PR promotes a message that has been created and journalism creates the message.
Oh, okay. Oh, I like that idea. So PR promotes a message that has been created, crafted,
Yeah.
and journalists create a message that is different in what way?
Like, let's say, like, I'm just gonna use like a health thing.
Okay.
The water crisis in like Flint,
Mm-hmm.
journalists like uncovered that, and then PR like practitioners for the like pro side of clean water, they're promoting that message.
Okay. Oh, great.
That like Flint should have like better water. This is
Sure.
what they're not doing. This is what they should do.
Okay. Good. Good example too. What other differences between PR and journalism?
PR
Sure.
advocates for certain things.
Yeah, PR advocates, and the goal of a journalist is not to be an advocate. We're supposed to be hands-off. We don't put a bumper sticker on our car for a particular position or political candidate, or even though I'll tell you I'm all for clean water, I'm not going to put that bumper sticker on because I'm not to be an advocate in that position. Good. Any other differences you can think of between journalism and PR? Yeah.
The journalists looking for the best story for themselves, and it's kind of like they're all working by themselves to try to get the best story from a public relations person, so their company can be better than the rest of them.
Okay.
Like
So-
ABC, Fox, CNN, all those people are going to, all the journalists who work for those companies
Mhm.
go to certain events, and I think they all compete against each other to get the best story.
Right.
Public relations are just letting them know and stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah, so the goal and the audience is a little bit different for PR and for journalists. So when you're working as a PR practitioner, who's your audience?
Journalists.
Journalists? Who are you really trying to please?
the
Companies.
general public.
Your client, your,
Everyone.
yeah, everyone. You have a lot of bosses, right, when you're a PR practitioner. Juan?
Like an example that comes to mind is like the Tylenol scandal.
Yeah.
Like a PR practitioner would like go to a press conference, deliver the message that we don't know what's going on, and then the journalists would like document that and they would distribute it further.
Right.
So it's kind of like a chain of command.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, and so you want to have a journalist take notice of what you put out so that they can spread it to a broader audience. You often think of PR practitioners as having a very targeted audience, that you know specifically the group that you're trying to reach with a message, and maybe in a certain instance that group is journalists who are going to spread it to the general public, or it's a group who would be interested in your client's product or would want to work with your client or something like that. So your audience is a little bit different. These are good ones. Any other differences you can think of between public relations and journalism?
I just feel like journalists chew people out.
Ooh.
Because like the whole, like remember the whole like E. coli outbreak on the West Coast, and like FDA is responsible for that, right? The Food and Drug Administration.
Sure.
So I bet you journalists like ate them alive, but like.
Wow, that's we put a different spin on it in journalism. We need to get better PR if that's what people think of us.
But they fixed the issue. The public relations, I guess, fixed the issue, and the FDA. So.
Okay, well the public relations people didn't fix the
No, like-
E. coli outbreak.
No, no.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that they must have said the right things. So
Okay.
He's okay now. That's what I
Alright.
meant.
Okay, wow, that's an interesting approach to journalism. Do you feel that as PR practitioners, that you're like getting fed to the sharks when you have to talk to the media?
I feel it because once you say something's wrong, it's like
Oh.
it's over.
Yeah.
And the journalists are like so happy
Oh.
that like, they got a story.
Oh,
Right? And,
No.
I mean, it's true, right? Like if Donald Trump is saying something, he says something wrong, all the journalists are writing stuff.
I'm sorry.
But you know what I mean, right?
yeah, so we do love a good story, but I love a good story just as much when something wonderful happens as I do when I think, wow, the public needs to know about this bad thing.
No.
I don't know that I delight in it, but yeah, I guess I see what you're saying. Oh, Juan.
I put that sometimes journalists spread the fire and PR practitioners have to like put it out.
Okay.
So for like any sort of
You
scandal.
have to be very careful what you say as a PR practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to be careful. You really have to craft your message,
I
Michaela.
feel like journalism too is like every man for himself
Yeah.
with the story, and then PR is more like teamwork.
A team,
cooperation.
okay. All right.
It's survival of the fittest.
Well,
Lorraine.
I was gonna say that I feel like journalism can either be beneficial towards public relations or extremely detrimental.
Okay.
And it'll go either way.
Sure.
I think public relations kind of just, like they're here to do a job, they have to do their job, but if journalism happens not to like what they're doing, then their story might change or like. I
So
don't-
can you see the value then, with that feeling, can you see the value in understanding how better to work with journalists? Okay, so that's kind of what I want to talk about today. Did you want to add something
I
else?
really wonder if you would do this with like your journalism class, like how like it would be like completely flipped.
Yeah, so I'm asking Dr. Krajewski to come and talk to my students about PR. So I'm curious, we'll ask her. She'll have the videotape, so we'll find out. We'll do a comparison.
It's like we're enemies.
Yeah. That's so interesting that you say, Adam says it's like we're enemies. So I come from the journalism side, and we refer to PR as the dark side. And so when a journalist leaves journalism, leaves news reporting to go to PR, we say like, oh, we lost one to the dark side. So I don't want to perpetuate that. I want you to think of it as a lighthearted joke because we're not in competition. Journalists rely on PR practitioners, and PR practitioners rely on people in the media.
I mean, like in
Michaela.
political science and politics, like we kind of view journalists as like, oh, they're gonna like ruin your life, and then we have to turn to like PR and like all of our like strategists to like fix the problems.
We like to exaggerate on the stories. And that's how
Interesting.
issues arise.
Interesting to approach it in that way. It's very different from the way that I think about news media. I think there's also, I don't want to get too far afield, but I also think there's a big difference between commentary and news, and sometimes it's hard to see the difference when 1 hour on Fox News is news and the next hour is commentary, and the same on MSNBC and the same on CNN, that every one of those news stations puts people with opinions who are biased talking about current events, and then the next hour say, look, we're the objective group, unbiased, talking about the news. It's hard to make your brain understand the difference between commentary and news, but they really are different. So let me talk a little bit more about journalism. I want to maybe soften your hearts toward journalists. So think for a few minutes about how things have changed for journalism, whether it's the news that you read or listen to or watch, changes in the job of journalists, the changes in how news is portrayed to people. Adam, you want to start us off?
The biggest thing, and I think it's on the top of the list, is social media.
Social media, how has social media changed news?
Just the way that it's just everyone has different views on things. But back in the day, since there was no social media, everyone had one view and heard one thing.
Okay.
So now it's like from all sides. So
Okay.
you don't even know what's true and what's not.
So maybe they're getting a lot of different viewpoints because we have social media.
Oh, well, I was gonna say because we have social media and pretty much anyone in the world can be looking at the same article as you are or the same
Yeah.
post as you are and
Right.
comment their opinions on it. I think it has made it easier for everyone to be more controversial on topics, to be more open about their ideas, to be more aggressive about their
Okay.
ideas as well.
Okay. Dr. Kravsky told me you guys were good. I didn't know. I'm kind of excited about it. Okay. Go on.
I think with like social media and like your cell phone, everybody's like low key a journalist because you can tweet
Civilian
something
journalist.
and if it like catches wind, it can go viral. And let's say if it's a negative or a positive tweet, like
Sure.
anybody can do that, and they might not have the credentials to
Yeah.
do that.
So we have a term for everybody's low-key a journalist. We have a term for that. And it's, I'll try to see if I can get yours to catch fire too. But it's citizen journalism. With just your phone, you have the equipment to be a publisher. You have the ability to write something, to broadcast it to a huge audience, to have it catch fire, to take a photograph, to attach a video, to make a commentary. Those things were not possible when your parents were your age. They would have to get, first they'd have to get themselves a camera, and then a television station, and it just was way too big for them. So you're right, everybody's low-key a journalist now because of citizen journalism. All right? What else has changed since your parents were your age? Peter?
Well, every single news network, including BuzzFeed, is on like Snapchat and
Yeah.
Instagram or whatever else. So it really changes how we get our news because you can just access it so easily and you don't know if it's right or wrong or
Yeah, it's so easy
who
to
it's
access.
even coming from, really.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to find the source of the news. It's so easy to access news. News is popping up in places where you didn't even expect to see it. You went to Snapchat to look at, messages from your friends, and then news sneaks in there to be discovered, right? Sam?
Yeah, I agree that it is a lot more accessible, but you can also select what you want to see.
Yeah.
So like if you don't want to see Fox News, you don't have to. You can just pick I want to see CNN instead. So you can just like look at that and not see any other viewpoints.
Yeah, you're right. So we have a term for that too. It'll be vocabulary day. That is called selective exposure. I can choose which things I want to expose myself to and which things I want to avoid. So I can choose to only, and this is something humans do, it's kind of in our nature, we tend to choose things that fit with our worldview. So if your worldview is not the worldview of Breitbart, you are not going to read Breitbart. You're going to put your blinders on. If you're scrolling through Twitter and you see a link to it, you're going to keep on scrolling. You're not going to explore or discover those stories on Snapchat. And it's very polarizing, right? If I only look at what I already, feel good about, and you only look what you already feel good about, we're going to end up on very far ends of the spectrum, and we won't meet in the middle as much.
I think with how much exposure to journalism has excelled throughout the years, it's also kind of impossible to not stay informed all the time because before you used to have to wait for the newspaper to
Yeah.
get there and you'd read those stories and then you'd have to wait again a couple other days, wait for your newspaper to get there again. But you could just choose to throw out the newspaper, cancel your subscription, and just be completely ignorant to it. But now things are automatically programmed to your phone. When you're walking around, people are scrolling through the news on their phones. Like
Yes.
you just can't avoid being
Yeah.
informed.
I have a friend who recently told me she was taking a break from the news, and I thought, how? What do you do? You're like, how can you take a break? Because you can't scroll through any social media without seeing it. you can't walk around town without hearing something or seeing something. Jordan?
Speaking of that, it also sparked a bunch of like pseudo events.
Okay.
Like if you look at like Trump's Twitter, basically all of it's like a pseudo event
Yeah.
in a sense. But like every media is still like covering it, no matter
Yeah.
like what side they're on.
I have a guess that Adam feels like sometimes they make a story out of a molehill, that there's nothing there, a non-event, and we run a story about it. All right? Mark?
I'd say like concentration of ownership is more prevalent, so more like journalist messages are alike because they can't say certain things.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so we have very few voices out there because 90% of all the media that we consume in the US is owned by just a few organizations, and that's magazines, movies, films, newspapers, all of it. So that's very few voices. So sometimes those other voices just are totally omitted. We never even get to hear them. Good. Not good. Not good, no. Any other things you can think of? Changes? Oh, let's try not to. I feel trapped over here by the camera, and then any other differences you can think of? And so these are, I thought of some more differences, but I really came at it from a journalist point of view. So some of the changes that we would notice are the fact that we're on a 24-hour news cycle now, where before we could avoid the news a little bit, right? The newspaper came out in the morning. It often came out in the evening as well. There would be 2 editions. But otherwise, that was the news. So you weren't looking at it constantly. So for journalists, what kind of pressure do you think that puts on them, that the news, we got to post a story online, we got to put something on the television news because it's running 24 hours a day. What do you think that does to journalists?
It has them looking for things that aren't there sometimes.
Has them looking to find something to talk about, right? Which could be a tweet, a one-word tweet, and now we're going to run a story about it. We're going to run the same story 2 hours from now. Peter?
I feel like it also dilutes a lot of the big news because like every day it's little things,
Mhm.
and then you eventually get a big story and you're like, oh well.
Yeah. And now I've heard that big story, heard it, don't want to keep hearing about it. So there's a push to find something new, and there's not always something big. So I'm going to hit you with the big story, and then you hit you with like happy cat news and tweets that make me angry, and then something else.
And, I was going to say, since you constantly have to find like a story to tell, sometimes they turn to celebrities.
Yes. Yeah.
And like try and like find a scandal or create things that aren't there. So like,
Why else do they turn to celebrity news? Not just because we ran out of important stuff. Why else do you think journalists report celebrity news?
People love it.
Chase?
People love it.
People love it. You want to hear about the Kardashians, so we give the people what they want,
So
right?
they're like easy targets, right?
Oh, targets. That's a rough word too. These are lots of like heavy laden words, but yeah, they're easier stories maybe to get and report. The photos are available. We can purchase those sorts of stories.
Well, I think also journalism, like nowadays, has made it easier for celebrities to interact with their fan base, and
Yeah.
it makes their relationships more intimate because they can use things to reach them
Yeah,
before
that's-
they weren't able to do that.
And us as consumers, it makes us more interested, right?
Right.
Because I can tweet and Khloe Kardashian will hear me. I can say something to her on Instagram and she might respond to me.
Or you
So it feels very close and now I want to know
Or she
all
might
of her
block you.
news.
Or like Snapchat, like you can watch Kylie Jenner make pancakes every single day. It's like you're there, but you're not. Like,
So maybe that spawns our interest in wanting to read about them in all of these different outlets. Like, no, she's not on a low-carb diet. I saw her making pancakes yesterday. Right? All right. Online news has also changed things. It's not just reading one newspaper. I can read news from any place in the world. And I can read news from sources that are not credible. And I can read news sources that only are things that I agree with already. So that has changed kind of the landscape for news. Multimedia reporting, we don't just report in print anymore, or just in photos, or just in video, or reporters doing all of those things. This has been a huge one, attacks on credibility. So you've heard the calls of fake news, and you've heard the calls of bad sources, and the concern that we don't know where news comes from often, especially when we read things online. It's so easy to share things. I read this article last year, maybe at the end of 2016, in the Orlando Sentinel about these two guys who run a news website, and they would say, there's not a lot of traffic on our site right now, we should post something. What do you think? Hillary Clinton did something horrible, and they post the story, and they watch the numbers climb, everyone's going to the site, everyone's clicking on the link. These two dudes who did not leave their apartment to report this news that they invented out of the air were making $40,000 a month on advertising. That's terrifying, and that's horrible, and that totally attacks journalism because that information is going out there, and it's hard for people who are less media literate than those of you who had to take media literacy already. It's difficult for people to figure out what's real and what's not, or what to trust and what not to trust. You know that subscriptions are going down, not as many people are subscribing. Aggregators pull news from lots of different places like Apple News or Google News, and they put all of those sources into one long list for you. This is a big one. Newsroom staffs are getting smaller, so we're firing people. It's harder to get a job as a journalist. We're asking a journalist to also be a videographer and a photographer, so we don't need to hire a photographer because we have a journalist who's going to do all of those pieces. That also means that we're going to turn to PR people, right? Because we need stories, we have fewer people to write them and report them, so we might be looking to you to give us story ideas. Citizen journalists, or low-key anyone can be a journalist. Anybody can produce and consume news. Technology has changed things, so good list. So this is one way you could consider journalism and PR, which is they're the dark side and we're in competition, this is versus. But the truth is there's a lot of overlap, and we rely on each other. That's the big thing. So I want to go through some things that you should consider as a PR practitioner in thinking about the way that you're going to work with journalists. The first is that you really have, when you want to make the news, as PR practitioners, you have two options. You're either going to create a story or you're going to follow one. So what it means to create a story is that you have to think like a journalist. You have to think about the way that journalists come up with stories and look at what needs you have as a PR practitioner to say, how am I going to create this story that journalists are going to want to publish? Like, what is my client doing? What spin can I use to make journalists notice this? One of the things you should do, always, is consider news values. Have you heard the term news value before? News value is, why would anybody want to publish this story? Why would anyone want to read the story right now? And there's a list of those things. Timeliness means it's happening right now, so it would be important to read a story about it now. Proximity means it happened close by. It's unusual. We love to read weird stuff. Human interest, like those heartwarming stories, those BuzzFeed lists about reasons to have faith in humanity again, those are human interest type things. Conflict, something is going on, that two or more groups are in conflict. It's going to impact us in some way or help us. It's about celebrities because we love them. It's entertaining, there's some sort of issue in the community, or there's a trend or pattern happening. So you should be thinking about your client's needs, and when you pitch those ideas to journalists through something like a press release, you have to consider news value. If you're not, we have no reason to want to publish it. So look at a few stories here. This is erosion transforming a popular shore, and this was in the St. Augustine Record. What news values do you think are present in a story like this? Why is it newsworthy? Why would anyone want to publish it? One.
I'd say proximity and
It's happening close by. There's some human interest here.
It's an issue or problem in the community.
It's an issue or problem. Did you have a different one?
I was going to say impact.
Impacts us. Yeah, how many of you go to the beach here? If erosion is, have you noticed erosion transforming your popular shore? Yeah, I have. They're talking about closing Porpoise Point to vehicles because there's been so much erosion that you can't safely get cars in and out anymore, especially at high tide. You run out of an escape route. All right. What about this one? Why Why is this newsworthy? Michaela?
Helpfulness, I would say.
Helpfulness,
Human interest.
human interest. Peter?
Issues or problems?
Yeah, issues in the community. All right, it's also timely. This is sea turtle hatching time, so having people being a part of the steward program, they check the beaches and they do cleanups and make sure the little baby turtles can make it to the ocean because there's not ruts that are too big for them to climb through. What about this one?
I would say human interest again.
Human interest, Peter?
Definitely unusual.
Unusual, bless you, I've never heard of a double hand transplant. What about this one? This came out when you could not walk into a store without finding an adult coloring book.
Trends.
Trends, yeah. Yes, this is the headline. And I trust journalism.
Unusual nature.
Unusual nature. Does it make you even like a little, do you feel a little twinge of like missing your dog when you read this headline? Human interest.
I was gonna say human interest because everyone like talks to their dog. I don't care who you are, you talk to your dog or your
Yes.
cat. Like
My dog just got home from a 2-week road trip last night, and we stayed up late chatting because that's what you do. Did you have another
I'd
one?
say proximity.
Oh,
'cause everyone has a dog around them.
oh, interesting. Proximity we usually think of, we read stories about St. Augustine and Jax, not about Lee's Summit, Missouri. We read things about our area. Typically that's a location though. What about this one?
unusual.
Yeah, unusual.
Proximity.
Proximity, yeah, it happened close by.
Entertainment.
Entertainment.
Celebrity.
Celebrities, yeah. Good. So consider news value. You also need to, beyond thinking like a journalist, write like a journalist. So did you know that press releases are written like news stories? They're like a news story, but with extra heading information at the top. And we use inverted pyramid style. Do you know what that is? What's inverted pyramid?
Is that when you start big picture and then you kind of narrow down?
Yeah, exactly. So we organize our news stories this way. We almost always start with the most important information and the like a summary of the story. And then we dwindle down to the tiny details down here. And you write your press releases the same way. You also write press releases using AP style, which stands for Associated Press Style. It's just a format that we use. It tells us the specific way that we write things like addresses or the way that we write about something. You write a lead that catches the reader's attention so that it makes them want to read more. And the reason that you do this is because journalists who are trying to come up with story ideas all the time, who have a smaller staff, who have tons to do, who are very busy, have a lot of pressures on them, could take your press release, take the header information off the top, and publish it. It looks so much like a news story that I don't even need to rewrite it. If you've done a great job, I can just put it in the paper. I can just put it on our website. Good for you, right? Because it makes it easy to get your story out there just the way you wanted it. And as a journalist, I think, one less thing that I have to write today because I got a great story. So was it over the summer? No, before that. Dr. Krajewski and I actually worked together on a press release for Dr. Halcom's movie that she made. And we started seeing some of the press come out about her movie, and I thought, well, that looks familiar, right? So the things that Dr. Krajewski and I wrote, the quotes that we got from Dr. Halcom and included in the story, ended up being in the story, not just in the press release. And then you also need to make things easy for journalists. Let us easily be able to steal your story and publish your press release on our website. Makes it a lot easier. So offer them good sources. Include really great quotes. That way we don't have to find and interview someone else. So if your quotes are too PR-y or have too much spin on them, we can't use them. So make it easy for us. Have good quality quotes have an understanding about how things show up in the newspaper, and that will be helpful to us. It will make things easier on us. Give us great art and great photos. Sometimes a publication isn't going to run a story unless it has a photo to go with it, that we have the space to put a photo up or we want to catch someone's eye. So give us a photo gallery. Give us some art that can go along with it. If you're describing something that we really need a figure to figure it out, give us the figure. Don't make us make it. Oh, it was like a yeah. And then, yeah, make it really easy to publish. Follow our rules. Give us what we need, and we'll just publish it online, but we'll change the top. So I said you can either create the story or follow the story. And when I say follow the story, it means you need to be reading the news every day and looking for patterns, especially things that include your clients. So if you see a story come out about a difference in the way that lawyers are billing their clients and you have a law firm client, call the reporter and say, I have a lawyer who'd love to talk to you about this. Do you need a source? He can go on TV today. She can go on TV today. Or, I see this, we do it a little bit differently with my client. I'm going to write a press release and pitch a story to you, right? That you can bank on what's already come out. But you will miss these opportunities if you are not making connections with journalists and you're not reading the news every single day. So that is going to be valuable to your clients. Do you feel a little more like we do? You can see why we need each other? Okay. Anything else you want to add? Thank you guys for being great discussion. I appreciate it. Have a good weekend. But yeah, that's my